It's such a pleasure to be in Istanbul, and I was Istanbul art scene is quite new to me, maybe in the same way like Czech or Prague actually big to you. So it was over the past few days I had really like some really nice meetings and encounters around the city, and I'm hoping to learn what more from you and from the discussion that we might have over this session. So I sort of treated, when we were discussing with Sarah what you would like to hear, there was this notion, we just realized that maybe like Czech art scene has completely different system of funding, of structure, and of the way art scene is organized. So in a way, we decided that maybe presenting some projects from Czech art scene might help you to kind of like find ways what's different and how we sort of like how it affects what kind of art can we present, because I've been since I lived until 2017. I lived in London. And I used to be an artist, and I used to be a bad artist because I didn't like curators, and I didn't want to speak to curators. And in the end, I became a curator, which is sort of like probably the worst thing that can happen to an artist when you become a curator. Like, what the hell happened here? And the way it happened was that I was living in London, and like, as you know, like big cities are extremely precarious. And I was kind of like working in a part-time job, trying to keep a studio. I lived in London for 17 years, so it was a long process of becoming British. And then I was kind of like, I don't know how to speak Czech anymore. And then I decided to go back. There are many reasons for it, for 1 year. To leave London for 1 year, because leaving London seems to be like an impossible thing to do. And while I was in London, I started to curate. And I started to like, what I missed while I was being in the studio, I was feeling quite like lonely and isolated. And so I sort of felt that I wanted to reach out to people and speak to people. And from that need came this idea that I started to bring people together. First as sort of like artists, sort of artist projects, you know, so there was always this creative element. And as it happens, I'm quite good at writing, and I have academic education apart from art school. I went to art school, I'm also in academic education. So in the way, I found out that through curating, I can sort of survive a lot better than I survive through being an artist. I sort of found it really hard to survive as an artist. So when I came to Prague in 2017, the scene was so, in a way, different. And I was the new kid on the block, and I came from London. And at that point, it seemed to be like I could have had anything, yeah? Because no one knew me, I wasn't associated to anyone. And the way Czech art scene works, it's small. There are 2 art schools. There are studio masters in these art schools, and you are defined by the studios. To what studio you went, everybody knows who you are. You started with this person. You started with this person. You are this kind of person. And I was sort of out of it, you know, and I came from London. So in a way, when I came, things were just offered to me. And I was like an editor of flash art for immediately. Then I was sort of like, they offered me, do you want to be the director of Czech Center in London? And I was kind of like, I just came from London. I don't want to go back to London to become the director of Czech Center in London. And they offered me a job in National Film Archive to be a curator, etc. But at a certain stage, I became friends with these people. Maybe if you could go on the slide for me. And it was this artist called Billy Badran and Zuzana Jakalova, who are, Billy Badran is quite well-known Czech artist, and Zuzana Jakalova is a curator, and they came to me and they told me, you know, like, we want to do this like collective experiment. And they were like, we want to do an institution that is like a experiment in collective leadership. And for me, this was extremely exciting, because display is an institution that defined for a long time display or transit display defined Czech art scene in a way that it's been there since 2002, and a lot of like politically provocative or politically engaged or really interesting projects came from this sort of group of people around display or transit display. And Susanna and Zbigněk invited this theorist Lukáš Likavčan. Lukáš Likavčan is quite well-known theorist. He writes about Anthropocene, about planetary, about technology, and together we formed a collective. And with this collective, if you should go one slide up, so with this collective, we kind of curated over the next several years huge amount of like projects, and we sort of work together as a sort of curatorial group. And the thing is like, what do you like? What does it even mean? And from all these options that I had, I felt I chose this and be part of this collective group, because I felt like I could have the most autonomy, and it was something that London could never offer to me. Because what they offered to me, they were like, we want you to do experimental exhibitions. We want you to do exhibitions that are not exhibitions. When we want you to do exhibitions that will break exhibition format. And these exhibitions, we don't want any monographic, we don't want to work in sort of this monographic, one artist exhibitions. We want to make exhibitions that will like actually think about what art should do. How can we like use political ideas? How can we discuss class? How can we discuss feminism? How can we discuss political participation? All these things that in a way seem to be in London, you would be very limited in terms of as a curator. There are like hierarchical structures in London art world. And here we have like a non-hierarchical structure that we were supposed to work around. So this was for me, this was an exciting proposal. And so if you have, I wanted to say, if you have any questions at any stage, you could please interrupt me, because I think in a way I have a lot of material. What you will be interested, maybe you will be interested in some of it we can skip. Yeah. So in that way, we sort of realized a project that dealt with issues of race in the Czech art context. Like we have a huge Afro-Czech community that is widely unrecognized, and we were thinking about how to give people who don't have visibility, how to give them visibility. This was these two projects, the three projects with the Black testimony. So what was really important there was not to do representational exhibitions. And what do I mean by non-representational exhibition? We were thinking about how to do an exhibition that would actually affect institutional structure, and that would actually change distribution of money, decision making, and power. And these decisions and power would be made with artists who we were working with. And what was also important is a long-term support. So we did not want to do this, okay, we are doing the project about ecology, we are doing a project about race, we are doing a project, these sort of strong socially engaged topic, and we will do an exhibition and that's over. For us, it was really important to kind of like set up these dialogues as a long-term project and find funding and support for these artists, so they would feel they have as much autonomy over the decision making and we as curators, we would stand back and we would sort of form this supportive and caring network for the artists as sort of like support network, instead of someone who tells this artist, I'm selecting this work, this is the work I want in my exhibition. So what was important for example, with working this like this Black Testimony project, we invited, we brought together Caribbean artists from the UK, and we brought together Afro-Czech artists, and we gave them a residency, we gave them financial support for 2 years, and we enabled these two groups to meet together for 2 years and work together and create friendship through where we stood, we sort of stepped aside, and we helped them to realize the art they wanted to make. And in the end, there was the outcome was an exhibition. But the most important thing about this process was enable these artists to be able to kind of work on their own modes of visibility and of their own modes of the way they understood what was important to them. So as us as white people from certain background, we would not decide what was in this case important. And so this was like, this seemed to be like a very idealized project. We also, if you, this maybe, if you would click through next 2 slides to show, this was the space on display, so you get maybe a better idea. It's a medium-sized institution. Next slide. Oh, I can click into it. Yes, all right.
I don't.
So you can, so this, you know, so it's a medium space. It is sort of, it shows quite well more like media-based art because it is a large, enormous basement. Instead of, it's not very good for painting. It's sort of define the space as well. And we also set up a publishing house. We published about 4 books a year. Some of them were from our own, as we commissioned new books, and we sort of like translated really important books and created anthologies that of texts that were not translated into Czech before. So that was sort of like, that's how we worked from 2017 to 2021. And this dating is really important because in a way, how were these projects funded and how they were enabled, yeah? So we are very sort of lucky in the Czech Republic that until very recently, we have sort of state funding, city funding, and you can reach to like a lot of EU and international grants or international funding. So this play is still funded by City of Prague. It is funded by Ministry of Culture, and it is funded through international funding. So we apply for funding that's called Norwegian grants, where you can apply for quite substantive amount of money from Norway. So Norway Oil and pays for programs in the Czech Republic. And also you can apply for certain EU funding as part of the European Union. So this project does not rely on any, we never had to rely on any private funding or any private money in order to make this happen. What you have to do, you have to reapply every year for with projects and for funding. So you have to apply to the government or the city to give you money. This is sort of an issue. This is something that is starting to be an issue now in 2026 when we recently elected populist government. We elected the Minister of Culture is far-right minister, which means that suddenly the things that are, and it actually has started to take an effect, and I will talk about it a little bit later, that basically, of course, the things that will be funded will be different things that were funded in 2017. And this time before COVID, it seems almost like an idealized time because we use these things like I will quickly go through this. I wrote about what we did at Display for this publication. It was feminist and queer activism and curating. It is a book that you can, it was done together with MIT and Academy of Arts in Vienna. And I sort of turned this coin, this what we were doing at Display, creating the curatorial, because when I said that I was very much interested in politics of the body, in the invite to the stall, I meant what we meant by it. We were thinking about what kinds of bodies can access display, who has the access, who is excluded, and how can we change the institution that people who are not included in the institution at the time, Afro-Czech people, Roma people, people with disabilities, people who have some sort of any sort of like disadvantage, how they can access display and how can we change it and enable them to have access to the institution as part of the exhibitions that we were doing there. So like in a way, the exhibitions were one thing, but the support network underneath had to reflect what we were trying to like do with the exhibition. So if we talk about socially engaged practice, it wasn't a matter of representational exhibition. It was a matter of changing power relations within the institution to enable the access to people who could not have access before. And that was the change, like access notes in every invite involved, every invite we had. We notified people that they can call us, ask us, how can we enable them to access exhibition if there's any sort of intolerances, if they can get down the stairs, and we actually set on the side money to kind of enable people to do this, so we have support for them. And we worked with people who helped us to enable this support. So this was all, in a way, it was sort of a golden time because of institutional funding. Apart from this, I produced with my colleague Susanna Janečková, we kind of produced this book, Multilodes on the Now, on glands, membranes and cavities, that sort of circled politics of the body, but it kind of turned a little bit more to like post-human and non-human questions. And we sort of commissioned new texts and we kind of commissioned artists, and we sort of viewed this as a sort of publication, as an exhibition, and this was something that was completed at the time of the COVID. And at the very same time when I was in Prague, and that was a sort of part of what displayed it and of what it tried to do. We kind of got together with other people who were thinking in a very same way. So about in 2017, we came together with other institutions, medium-sized institutions in Prague, and we kind of formed this code of practice. And this code of practice, we published this code of practice. It was called Feminist Art Institution. And we tried to redefine through this manifesto, which you can find online if you look at this. This is like the link to the website. We tried to define what feminist institutions should do and shouldn't do. So one of the first points was that a feminist art institution should be self-critical. It should treat people well. It should pay a reasonable living wage. So people who were actually signatories on this feminist art institution, they were signing for this motto or for this manifesto, and they committed that we all committed that we will keep these working practices as the code of practice. So this was like an important project because we had 10 people, 10 institutions sort of signing for this, and when we did any sort of activism or any statement outside, because there were so many institutions standing behind it, people took it very seriously. So this was, I would say, in terms of like political and art activist organizing, this was really like important process because it enabled us, allowed quite a lot of political pressure, and we were able to we were able to pressure politicians, even in the city gallery, to make allowances for example, when we were talking about access, if children and families have access to institutions, they were sort of setting apart money for example, when you went to an opening, there was someone who would look after your children. You could bring your child we give them to someone who paid professional, and she was looking after the children, so you could go and see an exhibition, as a mother, and you didn't need to drag around yourself to toddlers. So that was a way how we set up children's groups on the basis of this code of practice. And one of the most crazy and interesting thing that was these are mostly representatives of a feminist art institution. In 2020, there was a call for the director of National Gallery. So National Gallery is a Czech main institution. It's the institution that commissions Venice Biennial. It owns enormous amounts of buildings. It is the biggest. It has the biggest collection in the Czech Republic, and the director looks at it sort of dates from. They have collections dating from Renaissance art, Asian art. It is like a major institution. And there was an open call, and we were like, how about we, as a feminist art institution, how about if we applied for it as a collective? So us as 10 women or 10 sort of leaders of this feminist art institution, we wrote a really amazing application. We wrote an application that was, we consulted, we went to international, we wrote extremely progressive, but extremely pragmatic program. We didn't go into that, so this is completely utopian, and we wanted to be selected. We wanted to get to the second round, and we got to the final round. From all the applicants, they interviewed four applicants, and we were one of them. So there was this international committee of gallery directors, etc. And because the program was so well written, we got to the final four. And in the end, the way at some point, it almost looked like we were gonna get a job, and we started getting really bored because we were like, oh my God, if we're gonna get this job, what we gonna do with it? But anyway, in the end, it ended on the fact that it ended with they actually found that it's not constitutional. They cannot give the job to a collective. And even though we interviewed apparently really well, and it was, we interviewed really well, we kind of have not managed to become like third or something. So, but I think that was still pretty very successful. It had a huge media coverage. This is a photo from a mainstream newspaper. We were on television, etc. We won some international and feminist awards for this sort of activism. And this was 2020. And then what happened was that the COVID came in. So it seems like, I don't know how it's about in Turkey, but it seems like the Czech art scene is really defined by this COVID period, what was possible before COVID and what's possible now. Like this, what I talked about, it seems like impossible now. It's like they are in a very different sort of scenario, very different sort of session, a very different time, and in a certain way, COVID meant that there was some funding available. While there was also COVID, I did some sort of instead of doing exhibition, I was doing this publications as exhibitions. So this was a COVID project. Instead of physical exhibition, I was doing a lot of books as exhibition. So I'm very much interested in this format and experimental ways of working with exhibitions, and exhibition as a text, exhibition as sort of unfolding, processual practice, etc. So another thing about, I'm gonna check time, okay. Another thing about, so another thing about, another important thing about in a way, working collectively, I painted it as okay, we had this collective experiment, yeah. In a way, this COVID started, and I'm not saying that this collective leadership of the exhibition that I mentioned, you know, and I know I'm talking about a lot of things, but like this collective leadership of the of display. But I was an institutional curator apart from doing this activist project. What does it even mean? You know, what does it mean? This collective leading institution collectively. And I realized that I was pretty much in many ways I was naive. I like didn't know what it means, like being like what does it mean being collective, like how to lead institution collectively. And what we haven't done as an institution, we did not sort out the two most important things, and three most important things about collective leadership. Can anyone have any idea what they could be when you are doing collective things as a group? What are important things? What should be collective?
Making sure there's a system that's like make sure everybody puts in an opinion.
Yeah, so like the division of work, yeah. That's like one. Then who has access to money and who controls the institution otherwise, like the board. Yeah. So in a way, I came to this we were deciding on the program, like the program was collective, but there was only one person who had access to money, and there was only there was a board that wasn't collectively elected, and we did not even realize that there was this board. But when things became difficult over COVID, and there was lots of COVID meant for the institution quite a lot of upheaval. When sort of things got really difficult, these things started to matter. So like in a way, if you ever get into any collective project, first thing that you have to divide division of labor, money, and who controls you, you know, because if you don't know this, who controls this institution, that then when things will get difficult, then things will start to play a role. So in a way, these sort of invisible divisions of power that were there got accentuated by COVID, and in a way we fell apart. We fell apart in a way that we do kind of, we are still friends or we talk to each other, but the institution, the experiment ended, we left, and we were all really disappointed because we tried to do it for 5 years. It was something that I discussed actually today with someone, that we tried to actually do it for 5 years, this collective experiment. And in a way, after 5 years, we all, one person ended up with burnout, another, you know, and we all ended up sort of resentful, and I felt that I was doing the most work, which is often something that I do. And so it was sort of it taught me a lot about what is actually collective practice. And in a way, I would kind of I want to write more about it, what is collective practice and how can we what are the divisions between this alliance, this collaboration and collective practice. It's a really important way to define this redistribution of power and money that should be central part of collective leadership of anything, or collective way of working in any institution. So yeah, I don't know. So that was I sort of left display in 2022, and in a way I was sort of thinking, what am I going to do? And I was part of, maybe this is just for an info, you know, if you kind of in a way just to bring a little bit how did I even get here to Istanbul? How maybe this is this insert how Czech art team works. So in a way, when you are a young Czech artist, you sort of, if you are a young Czech artist, I was a jury on this Czech Art Award as a sort of result of being at display and sort of working and writing a lot. I was elected to this international jury, and so here is Fatoš Ustek, who actually sort of initiated my invitation here, and she was really instrumental in the way of bringing me to Istanbul. And I was incredibly lucky that I was on this jury with Valentines Klimačkauskas and
Charles Escher. And this sort of award, what it allows people to do is it selects three young Czech artists, and it provides them with international networking. They should be the most talented. It's a competition. We go through like about 200 applications a year, and we select like select three most promising emerging artists. And recently the age limit was taken away, so it used to be artists under 35, and now it's artists who are emerging, who are at the stage of their career, to give opportunity to people who maybe started when they were 40, went to art school a little bit later in life. So so this is Barbara Lungová, who like went to art school a little bit later, and she was awarded last year. And this is like a way how, and why I'm mentioning Encyclopedic Society, it is important because they do a lot of like external projects. They do projects in Bulgaria, and they actually create these structures together with meat factory residents, and that was something that I wanted to mention for you if you wanted to come to Prague. These are two institutions, like three institutions that you should really like follow. This is like Air Meat Factory residents, and so these are like structures that allow bringing artists from the whole from the whole world to Prague, and they have like they have really good funding. And Matter of Art is a biennial that sort of runs every 2 years, and they sort of focus on countries sort of outside of EU, and they sort of are always really interested in perspectives that come from countries that are sort of not that represented in the Czech Republic. So we had Turkish artists as part of this biennial last 2 years ago, and this edition will be really like focusing on Palestinian artists and like generally like artists that are coming from Palestine or from Middle East, which is this biennial is happening every 2 years, and it is worth following because they have open calls and they are looking for like international artists to invite and bring to Prague on residencies, and plus this meat factory residency. So yeah. So I don't know, because it doesn't like, I don't want to go through everything completely. I might go back to what I'm doing. I sort of work so after I left this play, I was a little bit like, oh my God, what I'm going to do? Am I going to just be like, because I teach, I find like pedagogy or teaching really important, and really like, like this interaction with young artists. I teach at art school. However, I don't want to necessarily like make like academic practice as my like main sort of like my main part of the identity. So then I was like thinking, what am I going to do? Like, so I do work like independently, and maybe I will skip this slide. I sort of like, I will jump because I don't want to keep you here forever, and we can go back to other things if we will have time. But when I left this play, I was kind of like, how am I going to sort of set up myself as an independent curator? And what happened was that I found out that there was an open call for Venice Biennial. And Venice Biennial in the Czech Republic, it is, as I mentioned, the Czech art scene is mostly state funded, or it is funded through city or state funding or regional funding. And this is the same with Venice Biennial. Like, Venice Biennial is a competition. Unlike in other countries, in other countries you might have to have an invitation. In the Czech Republic, anyone who sort of fulfills conditions can apply. So you don't have to be tied to an institution. You don't have to. You have to be. I think you have to be a resident of the Czech Republic. You don't have to be national of the Czech Republic, but you have to be a resident. And so I had this sort of working relationship with artist Eva Koťátková. And with Eva Koťátková, I did this project called Animal Touch. It was, again, exhibition as a publication. It is these 4 publication, and Eva came to me in like 2021 at the COVID time, and she wanted to do a publication together. And she kind of like, we had really interesting conversations about like, we are both animal lovers. I really like animals. Eva also really likes animals. We kind of, so Eva invited me to do several smaller things with her, and then she invited me to do a publication with her. And often people ask me, like, how did you get to, like, what would you advise people who want to kind of like move to, like, who want to do like this like big biennial competitions, or how I should go about it? And I would always say you have to work with the artists who you like, you know, and who you trust. This is like a really incredibly important thing. You have to find an artist who you trust, and there has to be this like really strong trust of between artist and curator, because this whole Venice Biennial, I don't know how, I know that maybe there are some people who did Venice Biennial in Turkey, and I would be really interested to hear what is it like to apply or go through this Venice Biennial process here. But in the Czech Republic, the process is underfunded. Yeah, it is in comparison to what pavilions in Germany, or like our pavilion is in Giardini. It is next to France. It is next to, in the opposite of Japan. It is this sort of very nice, smaller sort of size building from 1926, and we have, but our budget is about like I would say, someone calculated it, but we have about 400,000 euro for the pavilion. For everything, I think it's for like everything, and I think German pavilion has 2 million, yeah, euro. So like the difference in funding is absolutely enormous, you know. And so we are like standing next to these like big players, and you're trying to like, okay, like, it sometimes feel like you're like making like, yeah, it's a playground, and you're like next to these big buildings growing around you, but like. Eva had a show in a couple of years ago in Arthur, and you know she's I would say without like she's the best one of the best Czech artists at the moment, and Eva sort of kind of like was very hesitant about like even applying for this biennial, because when I heard there was an open call, we had this conversation about this giraffe Lenka, and the way we talk to each other, we send each other WhatsApp messages, and she had this thing that she found this like story, because Eva is an artist very much interested in storytelling, and she had this like, that she sort of had a big exhibition in National Gallery, and she always collects stories. She collects stories anywhere she goes. And each of her exhibitions has a full post box, and she actively asks in all her sessions and meetings with audiences and children and older people to write stories. And she collects these stories, and she basically found this story about this anonymous giraffe, and someone wrote a story. She was asking people when did they feel that their body was somehow not suited to the system, or when their body was sort of like excessive or too much or unsuitable or problematic. And she found this beautiful story written, and it was the Guardian from a Czech national institution or Czech institution, and she was writing a story that she heard, that this whole question made her to ask. There was this memory or a story that she heard, that there was a giraffe in 1956, which was first Czechoslovak giraffe, and this giraffe, when they were sort of taxidermied her. When they taxidermied her in National Museum, her body was sort of in the process of taxidermy, of creating this taxidermic object, that her body was sort of released into the public sewage, and this public sewage was, there was this strange smell going out in the main square, main historical square in Prague, and because of the strange smell, they had to close half of the Wenceslav Square. And Eva was absolutely fascinated by this story about this, like some giraffe that died in Prague Zoo. All she knew that it was like some giraffe that it died in Prague Zoo. It was transported to National Museum, and while they were preparing her, she polluted kind of like the most important historical part of Prague. So she was fascinated by this story. And the next motif that she had in this, next motif that was really like important for her was another part. On the other part of the story, she was like, and by the way, my own body is, this person, this anonymous writer was saying, my body is a problem all the time because I work as a custodian in, in an institution. And what they make us to do, they make us to compete at the fire drills. And we have to run up 3 staircases, and person who doesn't make it gets fired. You know, so we mostly employ, in national institution, we employ older people over 60. And so this imagery of people over 60 competing, running up, you know, trying to make it to the fire alarm under the certain time. It's absolutely like, really like, it's a nightmare, isn't it? It's a horrifying image when you imagine that people of that age had to compete in state-funded institutions for that sort of like, so Emma was sort of like this terror and this sort of giraffe. It kind of, she brought it together in this thinking about the giraffe, and we started a research. And we were doing this research even before the open call, and we identified that the giraffe really existed. It was first Czechoslovak giraffe captured in 1954 in Kenya, and we sort of like applied with this concept for the biennial, and about 25 projects applied. There is an international committee, and we put enormous amounts of work in it, and we won the competition. And this seems to be like happy ending. This is about the 10 months before the biennial, and it's not the happy ending as you might expect. There was enormous amounts of complication with the project, and of course there's always problems with biennials. You know, if you go to speak to even the country like Canada, you know, Germany, everybody will tell you, as it happened, people will tell you horror stories, you know, like about the funding, about like what did to them, what the commissioner did to you, like it is sort of like, it is not, but we, I think in a way, the way somehow in I think we were really unlucky, because somehow the fact that we were doing research at the Prague Zoo, which is a beloved national institution, and our national museum where Lenka stood there for since 1956 to 2000. She was nation-building animal. She stood there. When you came to National Museum, you found this giraffe was basically, this is her being captured in Kenya. We found these records of like, we went to check National Archives and we asked to look for anything about giraffes. So we found the ways giraffes were captured and transported into Czechoslovakia in the 60s, 70s. And we also went to archives to kind of have a look at Lenka as an object, and we found all these like sort of animals that are kept in the archives and that are sort of there as a project of science, and that in a way Lenka was sort of among them. And I had a picture of her in the archive, the way she looks now, but I sort of noticed that unfortunately, I dropped that picture and I can't find it now. I would show it to you. But just to kind of like cut this like a story a little bit shorter. So the fact that this is something really important about my curating and about my curatorial practice. So then you sort of realize like how you kind of gonna work with like socio-economic or socio or like politically engaged topics. Is this project is a concrete example of how what works and what doesn't work, and what is political and what is not political. Because in a way, National Museum and Prague Zoo somehow found out that we were doing this project, and they went absolutely crazy. You know, if I put it in like really like no, they sort of went like. We started to get letters like, how come we didn't like ask for permission to work with their giraffe, you know, and how come like we are going to archives and researching this giraffe, and you know, what do we want from them, and you know, and it actually it seemed to be quite humorous at the beginning. First of all, our proposal was to take this stuffed animal to, that was the first proposal. We wanted to take the stuffed animal to Venice and somehow work with this like reversing the gaze, and sort of we were thinking about like how to kind of like people take stuffed animals to Venice. We kind of changed our mind, and that was very lucky because we were like, why do we take this giraffe to Venice? What is the reasoning for continuing this extraction of gaze, of us looking at this artifact, at this giraffe calf? Like, how can we kind of like stop this like extraction of this animal's body, etc. But in the meanwhile, the director found out that we were trying to do this, and he was like, no way I'm giving you my giraffe. It is my giraffe. I'm not giving you this giraffe. And we were like, okay, but we're still working with the topic. It is like, we are like, you can't censor, you know, this is not a censorship. We are, you know, we are a free country. This is a history, this is national history, it's accessible to everyone. Surely we can like reinterpret this story the way we want. But they were actually started to use this phrase that Prague Zoo, and that we are actually using taxpayers' money to damage reputation of Czech national institutions at the international level. Yeah, so like, you know, so this seems to be like a strange, you know, because it was also in 1954, and this is the time of the heaviest communist repressions in the Czech Republic. You know, it was really bad, and anything that happened at that time, they usually, you know, it was carpet. The communists were terrible. They tortured animals. The animal died in the Prague Zoo, you know. But for some reason, this wasn't valid. You know, suddenly this communist argument they did not. This wasn't like we were like, come on, this is like 70-year-old story. But there was still somehow it seemed to be the fact that we were touching at the concrete event, concrete animal, concrete history. That was the problem. And the suggestions from them was, why don't you make it about some giraffe? You can even say that it was at the Prague Zoo, but don't say this was this concrete history, you know, this is why does it have to be this, exactly this giraffe? And we're like, because it is about the national building, it is about the national history. The reason why we want to move it to National Pavilion in Venice is because it's another restaging of national history and the way we relate to the natural world through this sort of animal. So this is what and it is an artistic interpretation. And the negotiations were extremely difficult. We were at the stage when they wanted to, they were like, National Museum was like, but we are not telling our side of the story. We want to have screens. When you will come to Venice, to the pavilion, there will be screens promoting benefits of taxidermy and benefits of National Museum. So you would come to the pavilion, there would be artistic interpretation, there will be our interpretation on 2 big screens. Or we can send our representatives who will tell everyone about why National Museum is important. And we were sort of a little bit like, we were kind of like, how can we negotiate this? It was very, very difficult situation. We had this negotiation until the middle of February, and in the end, someone from the Ministry of Culture managed to convince them that that Venice Biennial is basically an art fair, and and no one takes it seriously. And we don't know exactly what really happened, and they sort of stepped away, but they still sent their representatives who followed us everywhere in Venice. And anything that we said was sort of followed by a representative from both zoos and from National Museum. So, and also the publication was the subject to scrutiny. The publication was scrutinized in the way that people actually wanted us to take out, especially this bit about the body being the body when I described the situation that Lenka's body left through this public sewage. That was very contentious point, and I had to make one concession, which was not to write about it on the first page. They were like, it was like either that or like, so we could not, that we could have, we mentioned it later but it was in the second paragraph, and I had to make this concession that I had to take this sentences about this body being dissolved and leaving through the public sewage system. Even though we offered, we were like, it is an oral history, we will like say, it is artistic, nothing helped. It was kind of like, from many, we haven't made that many confessions, but we had to make this concession. And I was like, kind of like, we were thinking, don't these people have anything better to like do than worry about one giraffe? But that's why, in a way, I kind of like, in a way, whenever I'm talking about what's important in contemporary curating or what is important is this like specificity. And the specificity in terms of like when, how, and why. So you have like all these sort of like, a lot of like biennials and talk about Anthropocene ecology, gender relations, but they sort of stay away. You find it very hard to articulate what is the politics. So, for example, even like maybe even when we talk about like maybe I will skip now. I'm sorry, I can't like I have to skip through everything, but maybe it seems to be like a good way to bring this term, like rise of vaporwave curating, and this is something that this person called Rahel Ayman, she sort of calls this type of curating that sort of happens at the moment at post-COVID time at many like big sort of biennials. She wrote this article for free, so you can find this article, and she's just basically saying that this vaporwave curating is haunting art world, and it is this curating that uses these fuzzy titles and but you cannot define its politics really of these many projects. And the suggested ideas are so subtle that you cannot define what the politics of it. And she actually mentioned, I don't know if anyone seen Berlin Biennial last year, so she is very critical about Berlin Biennial. This was this politics of fugitivity, which I felt like there were like some really strong parts of the exhibitions, but in many ways it sort of stayed completely away from Palestine, with the like completely considered this Palestine like in the worst time of the genocide in Palestine, and they sort of like completely erase his history. So like Raha Aima is very critical of this this approach, and she calls it like sort of vaporwave curating. And in a way, I feel like maybe this project that I was like Venice Biennial project was very important, was because it was articulating this very concrete specificity and concrete histories, and it was trying to kind of suggest how name these specific histories and bring them to the side of visibility, of international visibility. And in that way, that's why it kind of brought out all this provocative, this kind of like extreme responses from political representation then. So, so I mean, like maybe I will just quickly go back because I have to kind of swap because I'm aware that I'm talking for like an hour. So, in a way, what the project tried to do, this is the final final articulation of the project. So, in a way, what you seen in Venice was this gigantic neck. Eva decided to sort of work with this shape of neck that was drawn from these two sort of contradictions, and it was you had this animal that was in on the left hand side. You had this animal that was so maybe it's better this way. So giraffes, they only go to, giraffes basically bend their neck this way only at the moment of extreme sort of like, when they feel extremely safe. Yeah, this when they feel like that they are very, very safe, because neck is the most vulnerable part of the giraffe. The predators really can't get to the giraffe unless she is sort of, unless they attack her neck. And they can attack it in the easiest way when she's sleeping. So they only sleep only when they feel extremely safe. So you have this sleeping giraffe motif. On the other image, this other image is this extreme brutality. I'm really sorry, maybe I should have given you a little bit of trigger warning. This is a giraffe that was slaughtered at the safari. So at the moment, if you have enough money and if you want to go want to go safari hunting in Africa, you can go, and people in order to get nice Instagram framing, they bend giraffes' necks to get this. When they kill the giraffe and they shoot it, they sort of like bend their necks this way. So in a way, this sort of embodies this terror and horror we have in our relationship to animals. On one part, extreme gentleness, care, we care for animals, we build them, we nurture them, they are our pets. On the other side, they very easily, at the very next moment, they become a trophy. They become something that's hunted, that's sort of an object. And in a way, Eva found these similarities between the way we treat workers in museums. As I said, this like brutality of people having to run up the stairs, and this story of the giraffe leaving the sewage, and in a way, the final articulation of in Venice was this sort of neck that is sort of interrupted, and this neck that was sort of, in a way, reminding a little bit of museological installation. And also it was, so this image is actually from retouring in the National Gallery Prague, which happened last year. But in Venice, this neck was a little bit like fitting the pavilion lot sort of better. And in Venice, we sort of, the masks were sort of complemented with, the masks were part of the performance that was happening 3 times a year, which were narrating the story of Lenka in a sort of like different performative angles. So Eva sort of always works with this performance, but what's important to her is this transformative education, or that was another joint interest that I have with Eva, and that sort of defines one of my future projects. I'm really interested in radical pedagogy, in transformative education. And Eva actually, this project, the way it kind of tried to bring hope, or try to bring reverse this hierarchical relationship that we have towards nature. So Eva, in a way, kind of brought this. This is actually in. I forgot. I'm really sorry. I have this in English, and what you are looking at is basically this story of the giraffe. Yeah, the story is part of her life. She brings this story to classrooms, to disadvantaged, to schools that have a lot of disadvantaged kids. She kind of works with children, and she also works with older people over 60. So, and she asked all of these people how they would imagine, if they could imagine a story happening differently, so how this could happen. And she was asking children and older people, because national museums and zoos are usually for children and older people. You usually have grandparents going to museum with your children. And she was just yeah, but all the stories are never written by the children. They are never written by these people. Who is it actually for? Where is their voice? So she asked them to reimagine phases or parts of Lenka's story differently. And she collected these stories, she wrote the script, and if you were in Venice, what you could hear in the tunnel was this narrative telling Lenka's stories through the perspective of children and older people. And some of these older people actually remembered this giraffe from 1950s because they are so old, some people were over 90 years old, and they remembered Lenka from both National Museum and from Prague Zoo, which is incredible that they actually remembered her, because it was this beloved, everybody knew about Lenka. It was the most important animal. And in a way, then they retold the story. And sometimes this imagination is very dark. So you go there and you listen to these stories, and these children imagine this giraffe climbed the staircase and fell on the head, and the children can imagine much worse endings that you would have expected from them. But it is in a way sometimes they get enormously beautiful imaginaries. They were so what would you do with this artifact of this giraffe? And this is maybe one of my concluding points, because I know I'm talking for an hour, and this gets really it gets a bit tiring. So the children were so what would you do with this artifact of this giraffe that is now in an archive? They can't actually, this body of giraffe is still in the archive. They can't get rid of her because her fur is protected by international treaties, so they can't actually get rid of this artifact. They can't get rid of the artifact, so it's sort of immortal object. And we were fascinated by this thing that you can't bury her, you can't bury this giraffe. And in a way, she's an immortal object. And the children were what would I do is I would put her on the boat and take her back to Kenya. And and giraffes have extremely developed sense of smell, and they recognize that part of their pack by the smell. And they were we would take her where they caught her, and then maybe her pack, her family from 1950, they would recognize her by the smell. So maybe her pack would find her and would, meet her again after these 50 years of being in the zoo. So the kids came up with this sort of ending for the giraffe, and in a way that is a beautiful ending of that was a beautiful ending of the whole story, that we would kind of find Lenka back. And these are all the stories we collected from a national gallery. From Venice it was a lot more. This was only the National Gallery last year when we reinstalled the show. Eva reads and archives them all. In a way, these are the closing questions that I was sort of like, that are probably different for every political context, and maybe we can like take it as a starting point for debate. Why has political art become apolitical? So, for example, my students are not interested in political art at all. They are like, political art became a brand, and we don't want to talk about it. And when I put it in very simple terms, it's interesting to think why it's that. The question of current curating, and I will translate what is here. This is something that Daniel Baumann, ex-director of Kunsthalle Zurich, said. The curate should be inclusive, but offer absolutely exclusive programming, and they also should, they should fulfill all these interests of people who give you like funding, sponsors, philanthropists, VIP members of institutions, but they should also like fulfill expectations of intellectuals, and they should make a programming that is absolutely breakthrough and extremely interesting. And what he's saying in this article, that this is absolutely impossible, that we are in, at least in Western context, we are in this like impossible predicament that in a way most institutional curators end up with burnout because they are trying to do all of this. They are trying to like be exclusive and inclusive and academic and non-academic, and so the exhibition satisfies all sorts of audiences, but also provokes an intellectual debate. And these are very contradictory expectations, and I think we all know that they are impossible to meet. So yeah, and maybe as a final point, these are like, this is when you think that about depoliticized art, and 1 week ago, Czech director of Czech National Gallery, who is also the person who was involved in a Biennale commission, and I know her personally. She was called off out of the blue by the new Czech far-right person who is far-right association. He's similar person, like I don't want to be like too hard, but they very much sympathize with what's happening in Slovakia, what's happening in Hungary, which is state control of culture. So this, he sort of called her like off, even though she had 9 months before the end of her directorial term. And in a way this provokes question. Now everybody in Prague is waiting for the state funding, and we get the results of the state funding for each year. We get it usually at the beginning of March. So we can begin to do programming for that year. Now they said that people will know the results by the end of April, but they will get money in May. Or so can you imagine if you have programming ready and artists ready to, or you are running a biennial and you suddenly don't have anyone, you can't pay anyone, and you don't know how much money you will get. So this is what the new government did. So this idea about like what happened to political or apolitical art, like can we even like discuss it when we have this sort of like extreme like far like encroachment of and what does it even mean for like reliance on the state funding and who should be relied on? Because I also work with commercial galleries and commercial sector in Prague, but in Prague it is often quite problematic because a lot of commercial, I'm not saying so, but some commercial galleries they are run by very wealthy families, and because Czech history is quite, you can kind of trace where the money comes from, and often it is not great. They come, for example, the money comes from, for example, from bankruptcies, and so these are the people who take money from children, like their family goes bankrupt and they're running these bankruptcy businesses, so you know that this person built collection on the fact that he's going to children's home and taking their television away, and they're like, can I work with these people, can I do this with what is happening with ethical commitment. So if you know about this, it's very hard to kind of like work with commercial sector as well. So so we are at the moment of crisis, and I'm like, maybe we could talk about what it sort of how you related to it in terms of like you being like, because I know that Turkish art scene very much does not rely on the state funding in the same way we have relied on the state funding, and yeah, so thank you.